Hey gang, and welcome back to another installment of Design to Move. My name is Ryan Maxwell, and today we're going to go into your rectus femoris. Each week you're going to get a new series on a muscle imbalance or a movement distortion and a corrective exercise strategy on how to correct for it. Each segment is accompanied by a blog series that's going to be posted in the description below. If you like what you're hearing, make sure to subscribe. Let's get right into our plan. So today we're going to target the rectus femoris. The rectus femoris is one of 4 quad muscles that make up the knee extensors and hip flexors in your upper portion of your leg. Now, the rectus femoris is the only muscle that is part of the quads that actually helps to flex the leg and attaches right to the pelvis or the ilium. For all sorts of reasons, including bad posture, we have a tendency to lean into our hips and stack our weight forward into our anterior hip ligaments, and that puts some pressure into our hip flexor muscles. When that goes on, we have a tendency to shift our center of balance forward, and that puts our rectus femoris into a direct line of pull, and that oftentimes makes these muscles tight and unhappy. Because of which, we're going to want to learn how to lengthen the muscle by using a fascia release system, and today I'm going to use a foam core ball to do just that. After we've taken the tension out of the muscle, I'm going to see if I can make it longer by stretching it. We'll show you how to go through a neuromuscular stretching protocol for that. Then we want to target the muscles that are responsible for bending the knee and bringing the leg back into extension, the hamstrings. Finally, we want to integrate this into a functional movement, something that's going to reflect an everyday activity. I'm going to go into a balanced position for that. And then finally, we want to strengthen the muscles that help to stabilize the pelvis. In this case, it's going to be the glute medius. You'll need an exercise band for that. So if you have any questions, reach out to us at admin@fluidhealthandfitness.com, or you can post them down below in the comments. Let's get started. So first off, let's identify where the muscle starts and attaches. The insertion point is down at the knee, the origin is up at the hip bone, and when they're tight, they pull the hip downward. When they're tight, they pull on the kneecap, and a lot of times people feel pain there. We call it runner's knee. So we're going to use this ball to lay on top of it and help to break open the collagen cross bindings and see if we can get some more length out of it. So using a ball, you could use a foam roller and or a lacrosse ball, but I'm going to use this orb foam core ball. I'm going to lay on top of it, pushing my weight down, and it's basically going to pin the muscle between my femur and the ball. So as I lay down, I'm going to make sure that I dodge the patella tendon. I'm going to go up a little bit higher, about 3 inches from the knee, and then go right into the belly or the middle of my leg. I'm bracing my body on my palms and keeping the other leg out to the side and really trying to support my hips by flexing my core. Not so much so that it starts to pull more tension into the rectus femoris. As I sit there, after about 30 seconds or so, I'm going to start bending my knee to start flossing the muscle through the pressure between the femur and the ball. After I've bent my knee for about 10 times or so, I'm going to go right back on the muscle and hold the pressure right on that trigger point or that sensitive spot and see if I can get a little bit deeper into the muscle mass. Now, you're going to potentially find sensitive spots or trigger points through the whole length of that muscle. What I would suggest you do is start with the most sensitive spot closest to the knee and work your way up over time. Make sure to get both right and left sides before we go right into our stretching. Let's get started. So we've inhibited the muscle and hopefully maybe even broken up some of that collagen and protein that surrounds the muscle to keep it from lengthening. So I'm hopefully going to be able to get more stretch out of the muscle. In order to do that, I'm going to prop my leg up behind me to get a deeper bend in the kneecap. So I'm using my daughter's little kickstand for this today. You can use a bench or chair, but make sure that however high you lift the foot, it's going to put some pressure on the kneecap, so that might be sensitive. And if it is painful already, you don't want to lift it too high. Just make sure to keep that in mind as you select the height for that stand. And remember, the main goal here is to keep your hips centered so that you're not pulling the hip down anteriorly. You want to center the joint and have a sufficient anchor point for that muscle to stretch from. As with any other stretch, we don't want to go right into the in-cap range of motion. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tuck my tailbone under, basically pulling my pelvis up, and then anchor my knee in traction on the ground, and that's basically going to lengthen the fibers between those two anchor points. As I hold it there, I don't want to be in pain. It should be a tug, but you might feel a little bit of a pressure in your lower back because it's actually competing against the muscles that are holding your pelvis stable. Try your best to keep your glute flexed, to keep the pelvis nice and stable, and then once you've held it for about 30 seconds, you're going to push the roof of your foot down into the step behind you, physically flexing the muscle for 6 seconds. We're going to breathe for a couple of cycles and then release, breathe in deep, breathe out, and then see if you can tuck a little bit deeper and get a little more out of that length out of the muscle. Once you've gone through about 2 or 3 cycles of that flexing the muscle for 6 seconds, let it chill out for about 2 seconds and then lengthen it a little more for about 10 to 20 seconds. You can go on to your other side. When you're done, you should feel a noticeable release in your lower back and create a bit more mobility through your hips. It's a great stretch that sets us up to activate the hamstrings. Let's get started. So we know that the rectus femoris is responsible for extending the knee and flexing the hip. So the opposite muscle on those joints that bends the knee and brings the hip back into extension is the hamstrings. I want to focus on the medial hamstrings, the semimembranosus and tendinosus. In order to do that, I'm going to get down on the ground and I'm going to do a nice slow contraction through the kneecap. So let's all get down there. Okay, so let's get down on the ground. You're going to lay face down. We call that prone. And first, let's set our body up. So tuck your chin down, take out all that tension in the back of your neck, and retract your shoulder blades back. From there, 2 big points. As you bend your knee up, starting to flex through your medial hamstrings, you're going to want to make sure that your hip doesn't hike up off the ground like this. When that goes on, the muscle has reached its end cap range of motion, and now it's going to pull the joint with it. So if you see that, reduce your range of motion. Secondly, as I bend the knee, my hamstrings on the outer side of my hamstring complex is going to want to kick in, and that means my toe is going to want to rotate out, my foot will rotate in towards the midline, and the kneecap will rotate outward. When I do that, that's going to overuse those muscle groups, and we don't want to do that. So try your best to keep your toe rotated in and only go through the range of motion that you can control. Precision is important on this one. So that might not seem like a big movement, and even though we're not adding any load, your body's actually competing against the tension relationships in the front or anterior compartment of your thigh. So what we want to do is really work on activating that impulse to the muscles that are going to help to stabilize the tibia and the femur, and also get some more control over our pelvis so that we don't dominate into our flexors. So make sure to get both the right and left sides. And we're going to go at a nice slow controlled opening. That means I'm going to actually extend the knee nice and slowly and then do more of a deliberate contraction of the muscle. Once again, making sure that we keep the knee and hip in the right position. Do 2 sets of 20 on both sides, and then let's go right into our next integration activity. Okay, so now that we've taken that tension relationship off the front of our hips, turned on our hamstrings, what we want to do is integrate this into an everyday activity type of movement. That's going to help our nervous system to remember how to do this when we're not just moving around day to day. So I'm going to do that with a single leg balance, and I'm going to reach with the opposite side of the body. Now remember, at the outset of this video, we talked about the hip being tight so it pulls everything forward anteriorly and we stack our vertebrae. So we're going to really be mindful about pulling or positioning our body weight or center of mass behind us and shifting our weight into our heel as we bend through both the hip and the knee. So I'm going to accomplish that by using a single leg balance, and I'm going to be profiling that on my right leg. So like we talked about at the outset of the video, our hip flexors and our rectus femoris have a tendency to pull our hips forward and pull our pelvis down. So because of which, I'm going to try to do the exact opposite of that with this exercise. I'm going to position my center of mass behind me so that my weight is stacked back, almost like I'm taking a seat into a chair but on one leg. Now as I do that, I'm going to keep my leg floating and or tapping down, but I'm going to make special note not to let my hip translate out or dump outward or let it hike up by shifting my center of mass over to try to get more leverage. So as I go down, I'm going to rotate my right arm back behind me. I'm extending my left out as a counterbalance, and I'm going to go as low as I can in that single leg balance until I start seeing my knee collapse in or perhaps my foot rotate out and flatten. Once I get to the bottom of the movement, it would have been about a count of 4 down. I would hold it for 2 seconds. I'm going to push my weight through my heel, activating through my glute, and push my hip forward and flex and posteriorly tilt the pelvis under. Try your best to keep your chin or your head in line with your rib cage as you sit back, and keep your gaze fixed forward and ahead. As I sit at the bottom, I'm going to hold it there for 2 seconds and then push through and horizontally press my hip forward. We're going to go at a nice 4 count down, hold it at the bottom for 2, press up, and set up at the top. Quite simply, this is just the everyday pattern that you would see in a gait or as you walk. We're just breaking it down to its lowest common denominator through the flexion and extension of the hip and the kneecap. By patterning this movement over and over again, we're going to help to teach our central nervous system how to recruit the right sets of muscles and in the right order. Once again, you're going to want to shoot for both sides of the body, and you're going to do 2 sets of between 15 to 20 repetitions on each side. The point behind this one is precision. So at any time, if you start to feel the body start to buckle where the hip rotates out or inward with the knee, you would want to stop, give yourself about 45 seconds, and then complete another set on that same leg before you would move to the second side. Once you're done, we would wrap it up and then go into our final strength position. So a big takeaway from today's video should be that the anterior flexors of our hips have a big impact on the mobility and or lack of stability of the pelvis. When they're tight, they pull everything down. So what ends up happening is the hips pull down and the butt lengthens. That includes the medius and minimus. Now remember that the medius is responsible for stabilizing the pelvis during gait. So we're going to want to strengthen that muscle, and we're going to use an exercise tube to do just that. So I'm going to use an everyday exercise tube to target the glute medius. It's a small diameter and I don't need a lot of tension. These are hard muscles to get to, and a lot of times they're neglected, so we want to use a weight that's appropriate for this type of activity. So with the tube handles in hand, I'm going to step on the band, straddling wide so that it's at least shoulder width apart. I want some tension on the outer lateral edge of my foot. I'm crossing the band over my hips, and then I'm going to anchor the tube handles on my ilium and then stand up nice and straight with my shoulders drawn back. So I'm going to sit into a soft squat position by positioning my weight posteriorly against center of mass behind me, just like that balance, and I'm going to keep the tension on the outside of my feet. Now, one at a time, I'm going to shift my weight into one leg and step my leg back behind me while still maintaining tension in that band being pulled into the center. Now, as I do that, I'm going to make sure that my toe doesn't rotate in and I'm leading through the heel. I'm going to make special note not to let my toe rotate out like this as I do so. That's going to target a different set of muscles than we want to get into. So make sure you keep your balance and your weight up over your hips, and one at a time, keep the width between your feet the same the entire time, so you can keep in hip extension and lateral abduction of the leg, meaning it's drawn out away from the midline of the body. Now in the beginning this could be pretty easy, but you'll notice pretty quickly if you maintain the precision in the movement, you're going to start to feel a nice solid burn in your butt after about 30 seconds or so. A couple key points to make this movement effective. Try not to lock your hips under you as you do this. You don't want to just balance out on those hip flexors. Once again, that's doing the exact opposite of what we want. Sit back into your hips. Second point, make sure that you keep the width between your feet the same the entire time. So as you step your foot back, don't let the tension of the band pull it into the center. That's going to reduce the actual flexion in the muscle we're trying to target. Finally, we don't want to rotate the foot out. That's going to actually activate more of our hamstrings and less of our actual glutes. We want the movement to originate or move at how the thigh bone attaches into the pelvis itself. And that means we're going to use our glute med and min to do that. By doing that, you're going to get a nice activation of the glute and get it stronger to help stabilize your hips and keep them nice and stable. So for the protocol, you're going to want to do 2 sets of 20 repetitions on both sides of the leg. That's 1 per side for 20. Now you would do that for 2 sets, and you're going to give yourself about 45 seconds to a minute between your sets to recover. So the big takeaway here, folks, is to strengthen your glutes, and especially your glute medius. That's going to help keep your hips from tilting anteriorly and rotating out. And by doing so, you won't have to rely so heavily on your rectus femoris like we just took out in today's video. We'd love to have you follow along with us from week to week as we go over new topics. So if you like what you're hearing, please subscribe. Thank you guys for joining us, and remember, your body is designed to move, so stay in motion, and we'll see you next week.